Okay. um, Today, I'm going to talk about something that's also a little dear to my heart. I didn't think I'd get as emotional about the stuff I was talking about yesterday, the isekai genre. But isekai is a form of storytelling that kind of touches on themes in my own life. And it made me reflect a little bit more that storytelling in general, just storytelling in general, um, is a way to not only communicate objective truths, speak to things that mean something to us, but also ways for us to express the things that are going on with us in a way that makes it easier to consume or even easier to understand than the reality. Because reality is kind of hard to parse sometimes, and we don't always know what's going on with us, but we know what we feel. At least we know the core of it, right? But stories kind of help us articulate this in a way that the real world or trying to be scientific about it or whatnot can't. One of the little things I like to talk about is that storytelling is the oldest art there is. Even if you look at the paintings of Neanderthal in France, they're telling a story. They're talking about what's important to them and what's going on in their lives, right? But probably the earliest story that human beings would say to each other as words developed would probably be something like, Thag ate that mushroom. Thag died. And that's it. Now that's actually a complete story. You feel satisfied by that story, even though it's very, very simple, because it has a beginning, a middle, and end, and a moral, right? And it speaks to a higher truth. Thag, we don't know what Thag is, but we know he's hungry. He's like us in that way. He eats, and he looks at mushrooms and thinks that that mushroom is edible. We could believe that, but something about that mushroom is incompatible with his biology, and when he eats it, he pays the ultimate price, which addresses a larger issue for us: death. We know that's what Thag is in common with us, is that he is mortal. He dies. And we don't want to die. Not usually, you know, on a visceral level, at least, we don't want to die. Death is bad because you stop living, you stop going on. And so don't eat that mushroom is the simpler moral. Bad things will happen to you. But there are a couple other things that we know. We already immediately know, because of how simple the story is, that there are two major issues that are being spoken about that are larger truths. One is, be mindful. Your senses can deceive you. You that mushroom may look like you can eat it, but it is bad, and bad things will happen to you. But the other is, there is an identity in these stories that we project. We imagine this. We don't know what Thag is. I don't give you very much explanation about this stuff, but you already picture in your mind what's happening in that little scene. The You had your own vision of what Thag was. I didn't say what he was. I didn't even say it was a he. I didn't even say it was human. I didn't say anything. But you had an image in your mind of what it was, what that creature was with a name, and you probably thought of a mushroom of some sort, and you imagined him eating it and dying. We are all capable of this. We empathize. We project ourselves into these stories. We go into another world. And this is almost sacred. It is shamanic. I put on a mask. As soon as I say once upon a time, your mind opens up to this world that I'm going to start creating for you. And it is a role that you are trusting me with, that you are going to derive something useful out of what I get and what I'm telling you now, right? So I'm going to tell you a story. Once upon a time, there was a village, and in this village there was a young man and a young girl, and they were in love. The young girl was the chief's daughter, and the young man was probably going to be the new chief when he died. And everybody was happy about this. They thought this couple was great. But along comes a dragon, and the dragon lands and he says, "You give me your most precious girl out of this village to take with me. And if you don't, I'll burn you all to death." So the village debates this, and for the greater good, they give the girl to the dragon, who clutches her and takes off into the sky. And of course, the young man is appalled by this. "How dare you guys do this?" And they're like, "We're powerless to do anything against this dragon. He would just eat us all and nothing would have been gained. This is the better option." And he is apoplectic about this. How could you? How could you? Right? It's better to die standing on your feet than living on your knees. So he speaks to the old man, the wizened sage of the village, and he says, "What should I do? I want to get her back." And the wizened sage says, "Go acquire a spear from the goddess of the swamp, and go acquire a shield from the god of the desert." So the young man goes into the swamp, and it sucks, as you can imagine. There's a trudge and a tail, and he has conflicts and all those other things, but he finally finds the goddess of the swamp, and he says, My paramour, my fiance, my lover, this woman has been kidnapped by the great dragon, and I want to save her. Can you help me?" And touched by his story, she gives him a spear. "This is a dragon slaying spear," she says. "It will slay this dragon if you use it correctly. I don't know his weakness. You will have to find his weakness to use it correctly, but it will do the job." So he thanks her and goes on his way, and he heads into the desert. And again, he goes through all sorts of struggles. And he finally finds the god of the desert. And again, he tells the tale to the god of the desert, and the god of the desert is moved. And he says, "Here, take this shield. This will protect you from the breath of the dragon. And he breathes fire on you. Hide behind this shield, and you will not be harmed. It won't protect you against everything, but if you use it wisely, it will protect you and you can take your opportunity. I don't know how to slay the dragon. I don't know how to defend you perfectly, but this you can do." So the young man takes his new spear and his new shield, and he wanders to the dragon's lair. And he climbs the mountain, and he finds the cave that heads into it. And he wanders through, and the stench of death is around him. And he is immersed in this darkness, and he heads into the bowels of this cave. And finally, up on a cage, he sees the princess. He sees his lover, and he's, I'm here to save you." And she warns him, "The dragon is mighty and terrible. Don't stay here or you'll surely die." And he says, "I have this spear and I have this shield. I'll fight him." Well, while he's talking to her, the dragon comes up from behind him, sneaks up on him, and eats him. Now, right now, there's a process going through your mind. First, that's it? What else? Is he in the dragon somehow? Is he going to carve his way out? What? No. Then my silence continues, and you realize that's the end of the story. Something's not right about that. I don't like that. And then you get a little bit mad at me, don't you? How dare you tell me a story like this? What am I supposed to get from that, you think? What's the moral of that? We went through all that process. You told me all that stuff just to have him get eaten by the dragon at the end? To be devoured? I know dragons are dangerous, of course. I'm involved in the romance of this story, and he just fails like that? What am I supposed to derive from that? Now you're angry at me. You're angry at me. Why? Why? Because I violated something sacred. I've profaned something, haven't I? I have taken my shamanic role and I've defiled it. I don't don't care what religion you are. There's something divine that I have done something unholy with. I took you on a ride in my airplane and kicked your ass out at 20,000 feet. Now, you're probably coming down a little bit because you realize I'm telling a larger morality here. It is a story still. Hang on with me. You won't want to completely kill me like you want to kill that dragon. Because what I'm addressing here is there is something basic and human to storytelling. It is it goes far before we were probably even Cro-Magnon. It is rooted very deep in our brains. The passing of these stories, and we are taken to another world. We are on that adventure with that young man. We know his distress. It doesn't matter what gender you are. It doesn't matter, you know, if you have to be interested in princes or princesses or none of it. You still understand his distress. You empathize with him. You are in his shoes. You are with him. You are in his head. And in so doing, by taking you there, I have entered into a contract with you that I'm going to take you for a ride and deliver on that ride. And I failed to do so. Not only did I, it's not a bad story, a meandering story that doesn't go anywhere. That sucks, but it's okay. It's just it's not an unintentional thing. That's the issue. I did it on purpose, and that's the huge violation, right? We tell stories in order to speak to higher truths so that we can derive lessons from them. The stories don't have to be true, not at all, in terms of their objective telling. I can tell you a story about a man who really lived, and all the facts are absolutely correct and true that I have somehow verified or whatever. You know, there's always nuance, I suppose. Or I can tell you a story about something that's absolutely untrue. You know, a story that takes place in the future. You know, where aliens exist and lasers and whatever. Star Wars. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Once upon a time. It's the same kind of phrase that tells you I'm bringing you along with me. And Star Wars in particular is a fun one because you take away all the technology and then replace it with castles, and you replace the spaceships with horses, and you replace the lightsabers with regular magic swords or whatever, and the tale works the same, right? Because those aren't the important components. They're modular. Now, spoiler, Darth Vader being Luke's father, this traitor to the cause who is doing these horrible things, standing against everything that the main character believes in, is a huge aspect of the story. It isn't the same story without that component, because it means that there's a little bit of that guy inside of him. That's the higher truth of that story. Well, at least that piece of it. And that's what I really enjoy about role playing games. When I first started role playing at this place I go to called the Luck Factory, I brought in my old sensibilities. When I used to role play, we'd come out of an interesting history of role playing. Now, I'll give a quick overview on this because you could go into the weeds real fast. I actually had to cut another video because I was starting to get too much. So I'll try to stay a little more high level on this telling of it. Uh, Once upon a time, there was a man named Gary Gygax. I won't hurt you this time. Gary Gygax was a college student and he had a bunch of friends, and he wasn't the only person involved in this. Lord of the Rings had just come out, and that was really hit people's attention, the imagination. This was this huge world where these very different but equal adventurers with their own desires and needs and conflicts and all these other things go on this larger than life adventure. And while the world itself is really large, it's about these people and their struggles against things that are out of control. The Balrog shows up and it takes out their mentor. What are we going to do without Gandalf? They're lost, you know, stuff like that. Uh, and people kind of wanted to go on these adventures too, you know, in some way. How do I participate? I want to do this, right? Well, these college students came up with an idea that I could tell the story and you tell me what you're doing as the character, and we'll build this story together. Interactive storytelling is what role playing is. But the thing is I can't just have you say that you're always successful all the time, because there's a philosophical truth that Nietzsche says that is starting to become more core to my personal philosophy or ideology or whatever. Uh, he says, "What is happiness? But the feeling that power is growing and that resistance is overcome." And people don't like Nietzsche. You know, he's the God is dead guy. In the full context, he says, "Who killed him? We did." So adds a whole new interpretation of that particular phrase. But with that statement, he's not talking about taking stuff from other people. That's how people view that a lot of times. That's not what he's talking about. He's saying that what gives our lives meaning is struggle. You can have everything thrown at you and you're not satisfied, period. And he's actually addressing the concept of original sin with that. Original sin is the idea that our baked into us is this internal curiosity that even if we know something is bad for us, we have to find out the hard way. We always put our hand on the burner. And if you read Genesis, you kind of get the idea that humans, before they eat from the tree of the fruit of knowledge, are animals. They're just living in this blissful place where they could live forever. They can eat from the tree of life. That's not prohibited from them. But they don't have meaning to their lives. They're just grazing. It's only when they eat from the tree that they become aware of death in particular, that this happens, that this exists. It hasn't happened to us. And it may not if we eat from that tree of life, but it happens, it exists. And there's death and suffering and pain. It's the same epiphany that Siddhartha the Buddha went through, apparently, you know, when he finally stepped out of his perfect world and saw the man with the blisters and boils. Why is that happening? It was his first encounter with that kind of thing because his life was so blissful. I see a lot of parallels, of course, as I've mentioned, between Buddhism and Judeo-Christianity. And that's one of them. Because Buddha was, you might think, sinless in that regard, until he learned the hard way that life is not like that. But so to that effect, in a very practical way, the game masters, the storytellers, would say, well, I need a way to make it so that you can fail sometimes. And you have to do something to be more likely to succeed. If you swing a sword at the monster and always kill him in the first blow, not only is that kind of unrealistic, I suppose, I mean, it's a monster, whatever, but it also doesn't provide a satisfying story. You have to have struggle in a story. You have to have drama. You have to have conflict. Otherwise, it's not a meaningful tale. You can't derive anything from it. And so the answer they came up with was rolling dice and using probability because these were students. And so they kind of came up with this very simple system that said, okay, you're a human, so you're kind of average on everything. You're an elf, you're pretty good at magic and getting out of the way, but not so strong. And you're a dwarf, you're not good at magic and thinking, but you're really, really strong. You can hit things hard or whatever. And so the dwarf would be more likely to hit the dude, but he might not be able to get away as easily. Now he might be tougher, so he can take a few hits more than the elf would, or the human might. but uh, he can't cast any spells. He doesn't have any magic ability, and he won't be able to read the words over the door or something like that, right? Simple, simple stuff. And it started out very simply. And it's just about going into a dungeon and fight a dragon, where the name comes from. It's the ultimate boss. And the rule set just expanded from there. I want to grow. So they came up with the concept of levels. I want to add skills and be able to use different weapons. And they get more and more and more creative about their character concepts. And they start tacking on to these rules different things that allow for the concepts that the players are coming up with. I want to be a ranger. I want to be a guy who is a human who is wanders the forest, but also can swing a sword. But I want it also to be fair. He can't cast magic, and maybe he is weaker. He can't take as many hits as somebody who normally swings a sword, whatever. And so they would build a little rule set for that guy. And this other guy's like, I want to be a holy warrior. I want to be able to heal people as well as hit things hard. But in exchange, what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow an oath, and I have to follow a certain code of behavior, or I'll lose it all. That's my cost. I have to behave. Okay, another character set, etc., 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 etc. But it becomes this just congealed mess real fast. And of course, there's lots of other people that hear about these games and are like, I want to play. I want to participate. And so they have to come up with these rules, and they're handing them out to people because I can't be the storyteller for you all. Someone else is going to have to do it for a smaller group of people. I can't dungeon master 50 people. You're all going to be bored. You know. So not only do you have this issue of a orthodoxy, so to speak, a core rule set that everyone's following, everyone's putting their own spin on it. They're all interpreting it in different ways and all this other stuff. Um, and then, of course, money gets involved because they realize, well, we can publish books of this stuff and actually make a living at this. Fair, totally fair. If you're dedicating your life as in a vocation like this, you should be able to eat on it. Um, but of course, you have to protect your intellectual property rights because somebody can just crib your idea and then start making money themselves. And of course, it becomes dramatic. That's what happens in the late 70s and early 80s. They form companies and people get kicked out. And all these other things happen. Ed Greenwood, this is a fun fact. Ed Greenwood came up with all the lore for Forgotten Realms, the stuff that Baldur's Gate 3 uses, among other things. This stuff is, when you think about role playing, his material is almost ubiquitous. At least in the fantasy context, because of how popular Dungeons and Dragons got. He sold the rights to all of his Forgotten Realms material to TSR for $5,000. That guy should be a multi millionaire many times over, and he's living on Patreon now. That's how it worked. It was a dog eat dog world, and nobody knew how this was going to go. There are plenty of role playing systems that were developed by various different people that didn't make it. And what's interesting, it wasn't necessarily even the survival of the fittest. It was the survival of those who had the best lore. Dungeons and Dragons had some good lore. Their system sucked. But you would have to either crib that material and convert it to some other system, which is a pain in the ass, or you'd have to play with this other system that didn't have the stories. That might be a better system. It might be easier to understand and teach people, but it just wasn't as fun. And then on top of all this, now when I became cognizant of role playing, it was in middle school. And this was in the height of the Satanic Panic, which I've spoken about a couple times. Satanic Panic was a real deal, man. This was on the news and in people's minds all the time. We were heading into the year 2000, which also tickled the imagination in a very negative way in a lot of ways for people. But very much a considerable portion of the country believed that there was some sort of underground network of Satan worshippers and stuff that were all living behind the scenes. It could be anybody. You never know who it was, no matter what they were professing. Apostates abound. And Dungeons and Dragons, somehow, because it was a fantasy game that talked about magical creatures, including demons and such in their lore, just cribbing stuff out of, legends and stuff, that this was a mechanism by which to engage in demonic worship. This was believed by a considerable number of people, not a majority, I would assume, I would hope, but a lot of people believed that this was bad stuff, boy. And of course, there's a countercultural element where people are like, yeah, it's bad, you know, Ozzy Osbourne, riding that wave. I don't think he believed any of it. I think he just was like, sure, that's exactly what I am. Buy my new album, you know. He was an interesting fellow, and his death hit me a little hard too because it was definitely the death of an era. Because he was fighting that fight hard at the beginning. He didn't let him in this country for a little while, and I think he appeared before Congress. I don't remember exactly the context of this, but he made him voice it. He says, "Why is it? What is the problem? What is it that I am doing? Because I've committed no crimes, actual crimes, except for your arbitrary, decency laws. What is it that I'm doing? Say it. I want you to say it. We don't like the kind of stuff you're talking about. At least you're being honest. You don't like what I'm saying. Funny that for a country that espouses free speech as one of its most core ideals. But um, this stuff was very countercultural and it was on people's minds a lot. And for us, we had to be real careful because Dungeons and Dragons, some of these parents, if they thought you were one of those kids, you were forbidden to talk to that kid. Not just not go over to their house or whatever. You were not allowed to engage at all. You know, school maybe notwithstanding, and so these other systems which weren't as good, we tended to default to because it would avoid this contentious subject. Now, they didn't always like the role playing part. The dice rolling could be gambling. Was money changing hands? No, no, no. We're pretending to be in robots. We're flying around in space and rolling dice to pretend that way, right? But rolling dice was always used as a method for randomly determining, based on your character's statistics, whether or not you succeeded and you failed. And you had a certain level of resources that you could use to affect the world. And those resources would run out. You could only get hit so many times before you died. And you would always, be working on making your character more efficient. And that was part of it. And the systems were often not very good at helping the dungeon master maintain a realistic thing. There was actually a rule in one of the Palladium books, Kevin Siembita. I remember these names. It's so funny. It's been 30 years or whatever. Kevin Siembita writes in one of his books, okay, look, I know if you make a character who has a good constitution, he's healthy, he's strong, he can take the hits, and you have him have a background with wrestling and martial arts and boxing and all this stuff, you can build his hit point base, the amount of damage he can take, up to a really significant amount that actually is more than what a grenade will do based on the rule set. Okay. So you could, in theory, and he's laying this out, you could, in theory, go jump on a grenade and just take it, you know? And he tells the game masters, so use your judgment and just say that's unrealistic. You die. It doesn't matter how many hit points you have. But the problem there for the dungeon master and all the rest of us left holding that particular bag of you know what is that these people are paying attention to the rules and they are building their characters according to the rules and they expect the rules to be followed. They're not going to be happy with you if they say to themselves, oh, I can take that. And you just say, no, you can't. That's arbitrary. That's like being kicked out the window at 20,000 feet. So balance was a real issue. Balance was a real issue in the systems. And when I was about 19 or 20 is when they came out. First of all, TSR got bought by Wizard of the Coast. Wizard of the Coast made this fantastic game called Magic the Gathering. It was a card game, and it followed a set of rules which we called the Tower of Babbling rules. Is what we ended up calling it because you get so worked up about playing this game, teenagers. God, uh, but they were balanced. They paid a lot of attention to making their game balanced, and they would update the rules. They would say, okay, this card we fucked up on this one. Sorry to use that language. We screwed up, uh, and we need to remove that from the game. It's just unfair. Okay, sorry guys, but on review this can't work. And then other stuff where it's like you can only have one of those in your deck because it's just too much. Because the games you would build these decks, you would buy these cards, and they would trade them, and they'd go up in value. And so it's like baseball cards in that regard, their rarity and what they represented and stuff. And people would build these elaborate decks. And while you had a random element as to drawing which cards you had, you knew what was in your deck. You would build a deck and play kind of according to a theme. But when they bought TSR, of course, they were like, these rules, man, we've known for years. These suck, man. They've just been added on over almost, over 20 years, actually, at that point. We're going to ditch it all. We come up with a new system called D20, and they made it open source, was the term. Anybody can use this particular core set of rules. That was the holy grail that had been searched for in the late 90s by guys like Steve Jackson with his generic universal role-playing system. And he also developed the attributes for the original Fallout game: special, strength, perception, endurance, charisma, intelligence, agility, luck. Luck was the fun one. Luck did some interesting things. Even if you bad luck, exceptionally bad luck, would do fun stuff too. But anyway, this kind of generic system that anybody could use, and everybody knew what the rules were, and they were like, you can make whatever you want. We're going to continue with the Dungeons and Dragons stuff and all that lore using this system, but this core aspect of it, anybody can use, and we're not going to come after you. It was open source. They took it away fairly recently too. The money grab, everything just gets a little bit worse every year, and that's another one of those things where you can't do this anymore. We're taking that away. And so games like Pathfinder were left to figure out what they were going to do. Now they're going to have to pay Hasbro or whoever it is that owns them. Everybody's always complaining about them. Wizards of the Coast complained to that about them being money grubbers, but so they had to change their whole rule set so that they wouldn't be copying stuff that was now licensed that they've been building their business on forever. But whatever. The politics of it notwithstanding, it's annoying as hell. And that was my bag. I was an older teenager coming of age, and then a young adult. And I game mastered and got real big into this stuff. And video games started to follow this stuff. Now, the first two Baldur's Gates followed the second edition rule set. I can't imagine what programming that must have been like. I'm so sorry for those people. They probably went insane. And I'm surprised that your computer didn't cook just trying to figure out what to do every time you tried to take a swing at a monster or whatever. That system is terrible, boy. And you had to memorize it. The players didn't have to necessarily, but the dungeon masters certainly did. They got rid of all that. It was a huge burden relief for someone like me, where it's like this rule system is so much easier to understand. And a lot of video games and stuff started to take on this stuff. The game of Knights of the Old Republic was a fantastic video game that used the D20 system, and stuff like that would come out. So it was anything. It wasn't just role playing. It was video game systems that would use this stuff, and it became a thing where everybody understood. It was kind of a lingua franca in gaming, where you could follow this rule set, and it kind of in its own form still is being followed in a lot of ways, which is kind of cool, because I dropped out of the scene for 20 years or so. So what happens to you when you have a child? You do not role play, more or less, until you get your act together and perhaps not be with someone who has a problem with it. But anyway, now I was really big into the role playing stuff scene, and not really the scene, just with my friends. And we would have these elaborate stories that we would tell, and we would go on adventures and kill monsters and save babies and all that other stuff. And the video games also, you would play these video games that follow the same rule set. So you got really familiar, at least me, I got really familiar with it. Even when I wasn't role playing with dice, I still understood it. But a lot of things happened between then and now, uh, particularly in the video game industry, because what started to happen is that video game, it used to be that the role playing games would impress the video game, would um, what's the word I'm looking for? It would, all the video games were derived from the role playing stuff. So original games like Bard's Tale and even like the JRPGs like Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy, in some way kind of derived the concepts from role playing, right? But it started to go the other way around, where the video games became more and more elaborate, and people wanted to explore those worlds in the same way that they did Lord of the Rings, right? You know, something like World of Warcraft, which that's something I could probably make a whole video on too, about how you lose your friends to World of Warcraft and EverQuest. Boy, that game. But anyway, people would be playing these games and they're like, I want to role play that way. And so I guess I never paid attention to it, but like fourth edition of Dungeons and Dragons was terrible because it was trying to take these video game concepts and make them tabletop stuff, and it just didn't work. They were trying to go backwards with that. Um, but the whole gaming industry has had, video games in particular, has had this huge arc of stuff. Right now, we're in this what I call a decadence phase, being that any kind of form of art, you have a birth or rebirth, you have an ascension, you know, golden age, you have a stagnation where things are starting to not kind of look the same, and then this kind of rent seeking phase where the games that come out just most of the time are not very good. You know, Baldur's Gate 3 is the game of the decade, pretty much. I mean, we got 4 more years to prove that, but I think that's really how it's going to work out. And all it does is harken back to roots that were in 1999 and stuff. It was a complete game when it came out. They still patched it and added updates and stuff like that. You didn't have to pay for it. They gave some more oomph to it over the years and fixed stuff. But that game was complete upon release, which is in kind of violation of the microtransactions and gotcha models of, you know, the constant bleeding out of, you know, the vein, the IV they stick into your veins to stay in your wallet. They just did it a different way, and it was incredibly successful. But it's rare. It's very rare now because you don't make money that way with video games. I'm surprised they were so successful. For every one of the Baldur's Gates out there, there are hundreds that barely earn back their costs, and probably more that don't. But in terms of role playing, they did clean it up and went back to fifth edition, or I would say they kind of went back to the way third edition was, but with a better, even a better spin on it with fifth edition, and that's the game that's out now. Well, now it's fifth edition point five. We took away the licenses. That's the version that we're on, right? But that's the world that I come back into. It's a little bit different, but the environment in role playing is so much different, because it was a provenance of nerds. You were kind of an outcast if you played role playing games. You know, you're doing that weird stuff. You know, is it Dungeons and Dragons? You worshiping the devil? You know, that stigma still exists among older people. Actually, you know, they don't necessarily believe that, but like that's kind of what they think of when they think of Dungeons and Dragons. Oh, that weird game that people played that I don't believe that you do, but do you? No, man, no, God, come on, you know. But there were videos back then that were like, how to tell if your kid's a Satan worshiper. You know, one of them was plays Dungeons and Dragons with his friends. You sons of bitches, don't do that to us, you know. But anyway, I brought my own sensibilities into this new world. Okay, and what I will say that is true is that things were harder in my day. You didn't get 3 death saving throws. You just got killed. You might get a chance to save versus death or die, but you didn't get death saving throws, you know? It's a little softer on the players so they don't just feel like they're getting creamed. And it was even worse in the old days. The guys in the 70s, they'd have like 3-4 characters. There's actually games that I played, they're called Dungeon Crawl Classics, where you got 3 hit points. And there are these like electric panthers wandering around. You're a dude with a stick. Survival is the game, you know, which is kind of fun in its own way. But anyway, but most players are they're really invested in their characters, and what they're doing is, and I realize this is when we were starting to do it in my day. And in particular, depending on who you were playing with, but definitely people like me, there were people who are just like, I want a guy with a big stick and he just hits things, whatever. But guys like me are like, I want a motive and I want a reason why he's doing these things, and he's bound by these rules, and he's moving in this direction with his combat abilities, and he worships this god and all this other stuff. Um, my first character was well well rounded out by my friend's dad, who was the dungeon master. He was ruthless as hell, boy. We called it the meat grinder. But my character just had this story that went with him, and we just, wow, this is great. Um, so I take that seriously because people are expressing themselves, especially now. They're expressing themselves through their things. They're kind of thinking about it almost like playing a game of dress up. They got a paper doll that is represented by statistics on their thing, but they're dressing it up in a certain way, and they are acting, they are improv. It's improv, and you can see now they've got these whole videos scenes that people subscribe to and pay money for and stuff, where they're treating role playing as an improv session, and it's fun. They're really good players, and these worlds are wild. They do a good job, man. I don't really watch all that stuff because I'd rather play. It's like the Fight Club adage, it's like watching pornography when you could be really having great sex, like, no. It's really what it is, even if it's bad sex. I don't want to watch porn, you know but the world of role playing has shifted so much. Women play this game. It was definitely a prominence of men. That there were a few girls, but I think a lot of it too is that the girls who did play, because the stigma was so bad, especially if you were a girl playing the game, they would keep that on the DL. I'm sure there was somebody's sister that would be like, "Can I play?" When they're at home, but they would. I don't know what you're talking about, guys. At school or whatever. Because you don't want that stigma, especially if you were a girl. And there were very few, and the games were very technical. It was a power fantasy for boys. Is basically what role playing was most of the time, but it's evolved into something else where everybody's kind of treating it as a way to tell stories, tell their own story in their own little way. Um, and the player base is a lot of women, is which is what blew my mind. I'm like, what are all these girls doing here? It's not a misogyny thing. It's a like, what happened? You like this stuff? It's kind of what happened to me. But anyway, when I first started playing, I came up. I played some Baldur's Gate because I was basically, after things went down for me, uh, alone a lot, and I played Baldur's Gate to death. And I learned the new Dungeons and Dragons system more or less through that system. It's an elephant in the room when you go in there. Like, where are you getting that rule from? You know where it's coming from. Most of you either learn this stuff watching these videos and stuff during COVID. That's where a lot of it comes from. Or you played Baldur's Gate, the new Baldur's Gate that uses this system. The new Baldur's Gate is actually kind of a dating sim too. That's part of it. There's this romance element, especially, Asterion. Oh, the ladies love Asterion. A lot of the gentlemen do too. But so it's like they've couched this Dungeons and Dragons rule set. Hey, build a relationship with this guy by following the dice. It's like slipping that broccoli into the delicious casserole or whatever. I don't know, but anyway, but that's where these people have got these sensibilities from. And I come from a bit of an older time, right? In particular, I like playing paladins, and paladins in the old rule set always had to be human, basically so they wouldn't get any special advantages for being a dwarf or whatever. Okay. um, but also too because they get extra powers. They were powerful. They're arguably the most powerful class. So you had a rule set that was strictly put on it. And in order to give people a way to have an axis of how their character behaves, in the old days they had what was called alignments. And a lot of games spent a lot of time trying to push this in. What kind of alignment are you, so that the dungeon master knows how you're going to behave? And paladins always had to be lawful good. In the Dungeons and Dragons system, you have two axes. You have lawful to chaotic, meaning you follow the rules no matter what, or you absolutely don't care about the rules, and good and evil, meaning you help people or you hurt people for your own self gain, and where on the spectrum you are. Now, actually, interestingly enough, true neutral was considered the hardest alignment to play because you had to play perfectly balanced, right? And in those, the mechanics, a lot of times, like, certain weapons and other things were bound to an alignment. You had to be that alignment and play that way in order to gain those powers. But paladins in particular, they lose their powers if they don't behave in a lawful good manner. So they're heroes. I like playing that character. They can heal people, and they protect, and they are good at beating the bad guy. They deal with the undead fantastically, or bad wizards and stuff. Um, they're not quite that way anymore. They do not follow the species restriction, whatever. We always kind of felt kind of had our hands bound like that. Why can't you be an elf paladin, or whatever? But the alignment aspect, alignments have been gotten rid of, so there's no behavior requirement. They follow what are called oaths, and those are much more fuzzy. And you could be a paladin of an evil god or whatever. Okay, we had mechanics for that too, anti paladins and stuff. Everybody liked to play the evil guy. Just try that out, try that glow on. But but I bring my sensibilities about paladins to the game, and most players aren't playing this way. Flat out, they're not playing in a lawful or good way as a character, and that's not a bad thing. It's just the way they play. But they just, this guy's in my way, I kill him. I take his stuff. Oh, there's free stuff in this guy's house. Cool, I'll take it. It's kind of how they're looking at it. It's just kind of a looting system. Whatever. It's just the way they played. But I'd come into this game, and I would be lawful. I'm like, no, we can't kill the innocent. Are you kidding me? No, don't do that. Right? And they're like, why not? Because my character won't stand for it. He just won't. He's not going to participate in this blatant murder or whatever. One game, I ran into a foul of the players a couple of times. This is actually why I stopped playing in a lawful good manner for a while, because it was so frustrating for me. Not as a player character. I'm okay with having conflict because you don't like the fact that I'm being a goody two shoes. That's part of the drama. That's what I like, you know. And you don't want to fight the other players, right? You don't. I mean, some conflict is okay, but you're there to play and go on a story, and you don't want to have the whole game derailed because you've got one character who's being a stick in the mud and stopping everything. So there was kind of a little trope that had developed already very soon in my play where I'm like, they're gonna murder everybody in the caravan. I'm like, whatever. Okay, my character goes down to the river and he decides to take a bath, and he thinks the sound of these screams are birds. So we can just move on, whatever. It's not realistic, but whatever. But I was playing one of these games, and it was kind of epic. It was the penultimate adventure. We were trying to get this relic back before we would gather multiple tables playing their own missions to gather these relics that we were going to bring back together and unify to summon the evil guy or whatever. um and On our mission, it's the first time I'd played with any of these people, most of them anyway. um we commissioned a ship, these people to help us to go get this artifact. And while we're on the ship, all the players, they're like, I sneaked down into the hold and I'm going to start digging through stuff, right? And of course, I'm doing my thing, like, guys. And one of the other players knows who I am. And they're like, you know what? Come up on deck with me. Let's take a look at the stars. I'm like, okay, I go up on deck and look at the stars, while the looting is going on. But the dungeon master catches this. It's a guy I'd never played with before either. He was kind of on a manic mode that night too. But he catches this conversation. He's like, hold on a second. Your character has an alignment, doesn't he? He's a good person, isn't he? He doesn't like this stuff, does he? I'm like, no, actually, he's lawful. He's very lawful and very good. He's not going to like that. And he's like, make an intelligence roll. It's the right thing to do as a dungeon master. I appreciated it, actually. So I roll it, and I make it. And he's like, you're not stupid. You know what's going on here, your character. What are you going to do about it, if anything? You just going to let it happen? And I could feel the threat in his voice. And I'm like, you know what? You're right, man. My character's going to make a big fuss. I can't believe what you guys are doing, whatever. He's all, do you tell the crew? I'm like, no, not yet. But I'm not happy with the fact that they're plundering this stuff of our allies who are helping us out right now. I'm letting them know it. So his plan, what he told me later, was he was going to strike my character probably dead right there because these stakes are too high, and your character's not paying attention to his own oath, his own set of principles. His god just strikes him down there, right? But it was just heavy. That is old school. And but instead he dishes out like 30 points of damage or 40, some amazing amount of damage to everybody at the table from my god out to them as punishment for their crime. Boy, the players did not like that, and they blamed me personally, not my character, me. Why did you do that? Why are you salting the game? Why are you messing things up for everybody? I'm like, I'm playing in character, and think about what you guys are doing. We got a job to do here. Our character, the gods are coming down from heaven, and the demons are coming out from hell, and all that other stuff. And when you're busy taking rings out of off the bodies of the dead or whatever, you got, my character is going to be really upset about that. That's just the way it is. But they were very salty about it. There are other missions that were like that, but it didn't change the way people played. They thought about that stuff. And when a dungeon master, right, again, there's no alignments anymore. That's okay. I still want to know what your characters think about stuff. If you're doing something heinous, I want to know how you're justifying it. You know, if you're murdering a man on the street, why? What makes you think this is okay? And some characters are like, this is just for my god of death or whatever. Okay, whatever. But I like to bring this element of morality into it because it makes the characters more alive, and I make them pay the consequences. I got one player who just his character's always a rabid dog. I hate playing with this guy. Honestly, this guy, he's real tough for me. I try, boy, but he is, and he's got a partner who's always trying to like soothe the room from this guy's miserable behavior, and it's just like I don't even know why this guy's with him, to be honest. I don't see it, man. I don't see the character that this guy has deserves someone like him. But whatever. That's their business. But I hate playing with this guy because he always plays like a rabid dog. He just attacks and just grabs and he's just this murder hobo basically. But this new year, new campaign. Hope you're listening to this, Brian. Is maybe a warning. I doubt you will, but you attack those guards without provocation, they remember. They know who you are, and they're going to shoot on sight now. Those arrows are going to be flying in your face anytime these guys are around now. That's the consequence of evil behavior, of chaotic evil behavior, no less. But um, what I noticed as I learned who these people were and their play styles and what they were doing, that they're all telling their own story. They're contributing. They're putting a little bit of themselves out on that table. And when you know who these people are and you start to see what they're playing, you see a lot of parallels, some very interesting parallels, I would say too. Even with me, you know, I kind of put Orion down because some of me is getting cynical. And he is my OC, as they call him, my character from the old days. And he's hard to play because I don't know if I feel as idealistic as he is as a character in my mind anymore. And instead, I started to play either derpy clerics who just like to help. Astra, she was super fun. I like playing her. She got killed for being too derpy by kind of a mean DM, but whatever. Happens. It's part of the game. Only character that was killed that whole season, too, interestingly enough. And then afterwards, I picked up another character who was a wounded cleric. She was hidden. She was worried that, from her heritage, her background, and she was afraid of people finding out. And it's not that bad. She's a good person, and everybody's going to judge her for who she is, not what immutable characteristics she has. They don't care. If trouble comes to find her, if she's got friends, they're going to help her, right? That's how it works. But as a character, what I was pouring in was this feeling of vulnerability and concern that I was feeling at the time. And now my new character is kind of a dapper fellow. A little overconfident and cocky, and he keeps getting, you know, caught tripping on his own feet a lot for how cocky he is. But you put these are characters that you build, but there's a little bit of me in each one of these, and it is true for everyone. And so I find that I want them to contribute. I want to give them something to make them feel invested and take them down those paths because it's interactive storytelling. We're all telling objective truths about ourselves and about the world. And the dice tell a story. That's another fun part of it. Is sometimes you fail, just the way it is. What are you going to do now? You know, and sometimes I haven't killed anyone. I've brought them close to death though, so they feel a sense of concern and they have to work together. You know, and they get worried. This is the first thing I noticed. It's right as I started playing clerics. People don't help each other. They think they're all on their own. I was playing a life cleric. Their job is basically to be a hit point battery. You lose hit points, I'm going to fill you back up until I run out. That's the job. I can do other stuff, but that's why I'm here. Try to be a helper, right? And first time I did this, these two sisters are playing, so they help each other, but they're not used to getting other people helping. And I hear them talking. Potions are a relatively rare resource in the way we play, and they cost money. And she's like, "Okay, I'm going to drink this potion." I'm like, "Hold up, hold on, wait, what? No, 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 cure wounds." And they're like, "But that's your spells." And I'm like, "Yes, I don't care. I'm here to heal you. That's my job." They were shocked by this. Well, now we see a lot more cooperation at these tables. My character died because of a lack of cooperation. Guy next to me, actually, I wondered what he would do. I had two death saving throws. He's a dungeon master too. He knows how to play this game. Knew that I was on death's door. One bad roll for me, and that's it. Anymore. He's standing next to me. He could help me prevent me from dying, but instead he goes to smack the monster. I rolled that dice before he actually acted just to see what would happen. She failed. Her fate was in his hands, and he didn't help. And he feels guilty for it. He does. And now the players cooperate a lot more. I dropped him, not on purpose. It's the way the dice worked out. He got just absolutely brutalized by this goblin. And he thought, "Oh God, my character's gonna die." No, you got 3 death saving throws. You got a lot of time still. Nobody's going after you. You dropped. There's other stuff that these simple-minded monsters think they need to deal with. And um, sure enough, before he even has to make one roll on that stuff, the druid, cleric of nature, basically heals him. He's back. No problem. Don't worry about it. You're okay. You're working together. See? And there's a sense of, oh, it is going to be okay because we're working as a team. Even when my job is to be the adversary in a lot of ways, but I, as the storyteller, have to be careful of providing a true challenge, a resistance, not a crushing oppression, but a resistance that they can overcome. And the last game we played, I had a creature that would petrify you, would turn you to stone. It was a slow process. I actually slowed the process down to make it a little nicer on them. But still, a couple characters got turned completely to stone. And other players were very concerned. They were very concerned. Okay, and I was like, okay, hold on. After we finished the mission, they got it, but 2 of them went down. They were in bad state. They were statues, which became a little comical thing. How do we get them out of here? How do we get them up these stairs? And they're all whatever. But I'm like, I hear you. I hear you. Your concern is noted. Okay, your concern is noted. I'm glad that you're concerned, but give me a moment, okay? Because I had a very powerful character that I expected them to free, which they did, and she rewarded them by bringing them back, and that added some story flavor to the whole thing. Particularly the paladin. This was a demon that they freed, and paladins are goody two shoes. And she likes how delicious he tastes. But it gives players a sense of satisfaction because resistance has been overcome, that they felt that there were stakes. It's not too easy, not impossibly difficult. That's the tough balance when you're mastering this game. How do I make it so that they feel challenged? And especially when it's pickup games, because you don't quite know what those players are, and sometimes you know anywhere between 4 and 8 players. Sometimes eight, it's a huge difference. So you're like, okay, I should probably put two of these guys in here instead of one. Should I put in three? If I put a third one in there, and then you got a time you got to worry about. At first, it's good when you have other dungeon masters at the table too, because you kind of bounce ideas off of them. With Matt in particular, one of them who was the hacker basically in this particular scenario, a fantasy hacker. So you have 6 rounds. You failed that one roll, so it was going to be 5, but now it's 6. And then I'm looking at the clock, and I'm looking at him, and I'm looking at the clock, and I'm looking at him, and he's like, and I'm like, okay, 4 rounds. And he's like, we'll say 3. He's participating. He's like, we'll say it was 3, but now it's 4. I'm like, okay, I think that's fair. Well, that's enough time for us to do this, right? So you get some of that collaboration too. It's very helpful. Uh, but it is an incredible way to bond a community, to let people express themselves. People talk to their psychiatrists, first responders. We have a lot of military, a lot of first responders. People have seen some serious stuff, man. And their psychiatrists tell them, haven't you check out Dungeons and Dragons? They come in and their characters are dark a lot of the times. Their characters are really dark. They're expressing themselves, and we're helping them through it and healing them a little bit by showing them that they can express themselves and that the community cares about them. It's remarkable. My character, my cleric, it was exactly what I thought it would be. My cleric, her job more or less was just to heal people. She could hit things. She wasn't very good at it. Just to heal people. And people weren't used to it. And they were surprised by it, that they could rely on another player that would help them. You know, that this person cares. And they thank you. That's wow. That's really great. And then they come to rely on it. Like, oh my gosh, I'm falling over here. I need some healing or whatever, And I'm paying attention. I actually keep a whiteboard. Tell me what your hit points are. Some of the DMs feel that's metagaming, but most of them appreciate it because I'm looking out for everyone. That's my job. That's what I see as my role as a character. I'm almost an anti-DM, you might say, when I play with these characters. But it helps bond the team together, and they rely on each other, and they feel like we're all helping each other. And all it is numbers moving from one paper to another, from one screen to another. It doesn't matter. It has absolutely no meaning in the real world from a physical perspective, but it has all this meaning to us as human beings trying to navigate this veil of tears we're trapped in here until we aren't. Storytelling is this oldest thing that we have, and how we bond with each other in a non-physical way, how we say what's in our mind and teach each other these objective truths that lie underneath the the stories that we tell, the way to communicate to each other, to tell each other who we are, because we can't always even properly express it, certainly not in a way that everybody understands. Psychologists can give you a bunch of 4 or 5 syllable words to explain what's wrong with you, but nothing quite says something like, you know, I feel lost for some reason, like a ship adrift at sea in a stormy sea. There's no ship, there's no sea. I am not on that ship or anything. But I can feel that a lot more as a human being than somebody saying, well, he is clinically depressed or whatever, right? I'm not saying that's what I'm feeling, to be clear. I think we all feel that way in some variety, degree or another from time to time or whatever. That doesn't necessarily mean you have anything wrong with you. Not to say I don't have anything wrong with me either. Disclaimer, disclaimer, disclaimer. That's why it's so important, folks, to me. And we gather in this intellectual framework of how we're telling other stories, different stories than these interactive storytelling. There are many ways to go about it. And I find these 3 groups that I'm a member of all tell very different stories in very different ways, but they're still telling stories. We here in philosophy are telling stories too. in a different format, a different language, not as interactive, but still expressing ourselves and expressing our perception of the world and trying to communicate to the underlying truth of who we are and what matters to us. And that's the beauty of it all. So, if you haven't ever tried a game of Dungeons and Dragons, just give it a shot. And sometimes it's a loser. God, I've seen people get chased away because there's some dumb kid at the table or whatever. It happens. It happens. It's messing things up for everybody else. But if you get a chance, give it a try. Because I think people have a lot of different ideas about what we're doing. Role playing, Dungeons and Dragons, you know, video gaming, however they frame it in their minds. It's usually something they don't understand or something even juvenile, maybe. Or, of course, devil worship. Come on, people. I'm trying to lure you in. Interactive storytelling is really what it is. That is the best way to put it. And I don't expect a new phrase to be coined for with something that already exists and already has a name that everybody knows, but that's really what it is. And if you haven't tried interactive storytelling using that probability element of rolling dice is to determine whether you succeed or fail based on your own decision making on how you build those characters based on a rule set that everybody's playing by on an even level. Um, you'll be surprised at what you learn about yourself and certainly about what you learn about other people and maybe even a little bit about the world. All right, that's it.